movement of capital in many OECD countries out of manufacturing, linked to offshoring and importing, and into services, that led to a fall in male wages and employment in manufacturing, and increased demand of female labour in services because of occupational segregation. The men who lose their jobs in the steel industry don't become cleaners and care home workers. You have that occupational segregation, that persistent occupational segregation in play when you get a change in the pattern of accumulation, and leading to that fall in male wages and employment in manufacturing with an increased demand for labour and services. And at the same time, the need to maintain household income because your husband's lost his job in the steel mill means there's an increase in the supply of female labour, what economists call the added worker effect. Women who weren't formerly wishing to participate in the labour market or trying to participate in the labour market now try to because the household needs more income because the male employment and wages have been lost. And I think it's important to think of these causal factors that link what on the face of it looks like two different kinds of inequality, the gender inequality, if you like the class inequality, because they're not so completely different. There are underlying factors which are shaping both. The other problem I have with the OECD study is it doesn't pay any attention to unpaid work. So it doesn't consider how reductions in gender gaps in the labour market may be associated with an extension of the total working day, paid plus unpaid work. Because they spill over also to those not of working age, the grandparents, the elder sisters. The unpaid work can fall, of course, and historically you do see some fall in the OECD countries in the amount of unpaid work that's done because people can buy labour-saving technology for cooking and cleaning, and they have had public provision of care services. But more recently we see the development of for-profit care services, the employment of paid domestic workers, often migrant women. And this purchase of labour-saving technology, this employment of paid domestic workers, this using for-profit care services, these are strategies which are obviously much more available to better-off women than they're many not available to low-income women. So that positive impact of labour market participation on inter-household income inequality may be at the cost of overwork for low-income women, an increase in their time poverty and their work intensity at the cost of their health. And if Anthony was still here, I'd say that, this is a point at which I think there's some agreement about being careful how you use this labour participation indicator, because very often used as if women were doing nothing before they started to participate in the labour market. It's all gain if they start to participate in the labour market. Well, in many cases they've still got this second shift of all this unpaid work to do as well. So it isn't that women were idle before they came into the labour market. And you have to factor into any discussion of the costs and benefits an issue that Diane Perrins is going to be talking about later. How much investment has there been in the kinds of public services and social and physical infrastructure that will reduce the amount of unpaid work that women have to do. And I say women because although men do some of it, this is a very persistent kind of occupational segregation in a way, that those gender gaps and the amount of unpaid work caring for their families, their communities, it persists even in Scandinavia. So, how could a reduction in gender inequality in the labour market do more to reduce inter-household income inequality? How can we actually raise the issue of justice for all? And I think this raises the issue. There are ways of reducing gender inequality in the labour market that could do more to reduce into household income inequality. And I've picked out measures that will help to increase the employment returns for low-income women. It's not just whether women are employed or not, it's what is the returns they're getting for it, whether they're self-employed or wage employees. Raising the minimum wage. Actually, been quite a lot of success in Brazil and other Latin American countries with raising the minimum wage, and indeed in the UK, raising the minimum wage has played a role. And raising the minimum wage is actually a gender equality issue in the sense that there's many more women who will be benefiting from raising the minimum wage than men in those countries. Using public procurement as a leverage to actually improve women's wages and the earnings of self-employed women. We've been seeing, certainly in the UK, and I think in other countries, it being used in the opposite direction. The public procurement is being used as a leverage to push people's wages and their working conditions down. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be used as a lever in the other direction. You don't get the contract to run the care home unless you can show you're paying these good wages and you have this good training and these good conditions of work for your workers. Expand public sector employment and revalue women's work. Public sector employment in many countries remains an area where, of course, high-skilled women get good jobs in the public sector, but also lower-skilled women can still get good jobs in the public sector in many countries. So expanding that, but also revaluing it. We've seen through equal opportunities cases in this country, local governments being forced to revalue what were traditionally women's jobs, like serving the dinner in school at lunchtime, against traditionally male jobs like collecting the refuse bins from the houses. And see, why is the one bin paid so much more than the other? So that revaluation is also important. Promoting women's organisation through trade unions and organisations of self-employed women, and strengthening labour market regulations. Now, I'm not sure all of these would find the same kind of favour with the OECD and the IMF as taxing the rich. In particular, these ones about the labour market and rolling back that attack on trade union rights and that attack on labour market regulations. But if we want to make a closer fit between improving gender equality in the labour market and improving the overall distribution of income, I think these are the kinds of things we need to focus on. How am I doing for time? Good. Okay, so some food for thought there. That's obviously one particular kind of way of looking at the intersection between the OECD never uses the word class inequality. In some ways that distribution of income between households is some kind of proxy for class inequality and gender inequality. And one way of trying to look at the intersection. Another way of trying to look at the intersection, to ask a different set of questions, is this study that I referred to about the impact of austerity. The impact was, this is just in the UK, and what is in particular its impact being for black and minority ethnic women in the UK. Well, that is the sad story of austerity in the UK, the headline figures. Just point out, of course, it's not all been cuts to expenditure, social security and public services, but it's also been tax cuts. There have been massive tax cuts under the so-called era of austerity. So it's very clearly a political choice. If they were so keen to balance the budget, they wouldn't have had all of these tax cuts at the same time. And I won't rehearse all those horrifying numbers that are up there, but just to draw attention to the fact that while the cuts to social security began right from the word go, as did the cuts to local government funding right back in 2010, the cuts to education and health are more recent. And it's only now that people are beginning to see how the cuts to education and health are affecting their local hospital and their local school. So, in our report, we did two kinds of things. We crunched some numbers and came up with some charts, and we also, there was some qualitative work with interviews with women in Coventry and in Manchester, and I'll come on to those later. But first, let me give you some of our charts. What this is about is to try and look at what's the cumulative impact of the changes in taxes and benefits for this decade, 2010 to 2020. We can go to 2020 because a lot of this has been announced, and it's looking, if this is all rolled out to 2020, what's been announced, what will the implications be? And we're looking at it